The Department of Government Efficiency says it's found software licenses at agencies that outnumber the employee counts at those agencies. That finding's renewing calls from Trump administration leaders and others to take an enterprise approach to acquisition and IT modernization. David Powner is Executive Director of the Center for Data-Driven Policy at MITRE. He's former Director of IT Issues at the Government Accountability Office. Maria Roat is President of Maria Roat Consulting. She's former Deputy Chief Information Officer of the United States. Friends, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. Maria, I start with you because this is an issue, this enterprise idea is something you worked on a lot as Deputy CIO. Why has it been difficult, do you think, to get uptake on it across government?
Yeah, thank you, Francis. When you look at the federal government from just an enterprise perspective, think about the federal government as one big enterprise, not agency by agency. There's a huge amount of opportunity if you look at the government as within each of the portfolios, right? Look at the services the government provides. Break that down, and when you start looking at that, you can really understand from that portfolio perspective how agencies talk to each other, how they're interconnected, how they need to access perhaps data, inquiry one agency to the other to provide the services out. You have to have that big, broad understanding of that interconnectedness of the federal government from that agency. From not just the agency, but the federal-wide perspective. Those portfolios, when you start breaking down those portfolios and truly understand how information moves, how services are connected across the federal government, that's when you can really start taking some steps and some actions to really drive some of those efficiencies. One agency may need from your agency an inquiry, I just need this bit of information, a 1 or a 0. Right? Yes or a no. I don't need to move data. I just need that. And then you start picking that apart and really start drilling down into that. And that's where you get the efficiencies. You get it in budget. If the budget folks understand the interconnectedness from agency to agency, you could bring that funding together and really drive those efficiencies as well to provide those services that you need within that portfolio. I've always been a strong proponent of that portfolio approach in viewing the federal government as an enterprise. There were steps taken, over the years to really look at licenses. You mentioned licenses earlier and some of those other things. But I think sometimes you need to really understand the big picture, big portfolio, the interconnectedness. You have to understand the mission and business across the federal government, then you can start driving those underlying efficiencies using data, licenses, budget.
Dave, Maria and others have taken a crack at this over the years. It doesn't seem to have stuck, and now it's something that this administration's really driving, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. I think the focus on efficiency and cost savings, but if you step back and look at this enterprise portfolio approach, there have been these government-wide initiatives that have worked. Data center consolidation. If you go back, way back to the Vivek Kundra days before we had cloud first, right? When you have a focus OMB initiative and you focus on an initiative with the right transparency and the right metrics, we have delivered for the American people. We saved money, we moved to the cloud more as one initiative. Also the portfolio stat initiative is another one. I think now what needs to happen with this enterprise-wide approach is we need to look at legacy modernization. So the question is, do we have the plans in place? Do we have a list of mission critical functions? Okay, we can debate what those are, but we probably will agree on 90% of them. Do we have the right plans in place to tackle those areas? Do we have the right transparency mechanisms? Do we have the right metrics? We talk a lot about using AI to help jumpstart modernization. AI is great, we need to use those tools, but it's not the silver bullet. We've done a lot of research on using large language models to understand code, the MUMPS code at VA with the VISTA system and assembly code with all the big mainframe operations. What we learned from all that research is the AI tools are great. They're not the be-all, end-all. We still need a human in the loop. We still need to train the models more. But what we really need is good management on this legacy modernization. And I would suggest to take the data center consolidation model that we did years ago as kind of a framework. We had closures, we had cost savings, the whole bit. We could do that with legacy modernization. We need to measure what we turn off. We need to measure cost savings. The last time we really had a list of acquisitions that are most important for the nation and we measured turning things off, I think was Karen Evans when she was federal CIO back in the Bush administration. So if we look back at history, we've had great successes, and we just need to emulate some of those things that we've done in the past.
You said a lot there that's important, but the one that I think he said, Maria, that's most important is the idea of measuring, turning things off. And that strikes me as the challenge that is in front of us right now. That's maybe the best next step for agencies to take. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so, because, I, as a CIO, right, I knew where every nickel was, and I knew where to find a nickel in the couch cushions, because, even when I was at the SBA, my budget was a rounding error compared to big agencies. And I think adding to Dave's, right, finding those efficiencies, you can find them and you can draw that out and then translate that to bigger approaches. But you also have to keep in mind, adding on to what Dave said, is that these solutions, they take year after year after year, and it's multi-administrations to really drive that. So you need continuous support, not just across the federal enterprise, but from Congress as well, right? When the budgets are being allocated, because you need that funding. And when Dave talks about the data centers as an example of something that worked, the eye was on the ball, very focused, year after year after year after year, and measuring that, how much was shut down, how much was saved, how much was moved to the cloud, what did you do, those efficiencies that were gained out of that. So continuing to measure that and stay on it. This is where OMB comes in, really providing a lot of that big oversight for a lot of these big projects, multi-year initiatives.
And that's where I wanted to go back to something that you said earlier, Dave, about the Office of Management and Budget. It's really incumbent on them, I imagine, to drive a lot of this. How much of that should be carrot and how much of that should be stick?
I think a little bit of both. If you have a transparency mechanism, that's a little bit of a stick, because when you shine a light on something, folks they step up and they march forward to the beat. But also too, there's a lot we could do here with this legacy modernization. Yes, it's turning things off. It's saving 80% of what we spend on federal IT on O&M, where we have significant savings. But it's also advancing mission. So with some of these missions, and you can even look across, Maria mentioned this enterprise-wide approach, and we could do a lot with benefits, combining benefits more from an enterprise level. So there's some really radical things we could do to really modernize the federal government with this. One other thing that I think Maria mentioned too that I think is very important, an OMB initiative is key, okay? Let's make a priority out of the White House. But when you have Congress focused on it too, if you go back, data center consolidation was a big part of the FTAR scorecard. FTAR scorecard's gotten very stale over the years. We've talked a lot about that. But we could actually revise the FTAR scorecard, or certain measures with the House Oversight Committee and the DOGE focus and all those other things, to focus on a couple of these areas and really advance the ball forward.
We have about 30 seconds left. What do you see as the best outcome for agencies when they get to that enterprise idea, Maria?
Really being able to work with their peer agencies, right? Being able to support the mission, because sometimes you just need a piece of information, and having that enterprise view makes a difference.
Maria, Dave, it's great to have you both on the show. Thanks very much for joining me. You can read more